Hello and welcome to this Icarus presentation. My name is David Garcia Sanchez and I work for Tecnalia Research and Innovation who are based in Bilbao, Spain. During this presentation, I'll be presenting impact chains, vulnerability and hazard classification. Icarus is a CIDR-funded project with the primary objective of improving the uptake of climate change adaptation in the decision-making processes of road authorities. In this project, we follow 6 stages. This video will focus on the second stage, providing recommendations on how to effectively build the impact chain case for risk assessment and hazard classification according to National Road Authority specificities. In this video, I will introduce the concept of impact chains. Key in this regard is the link that is established between assets, asset component and subcomponent, the climate impact drivers, and variation in magnitude and geography under different scenarios according to the scientific evidence. First of all, we need to understand the importance of causal effect relationships between assets and climate impact drivers. In this regard, IPCC classifies climate impact drivers in extreme and slow onset processes and trends. It is important to keep in mind that extreme events can have a stronger impact on the operation and exploitation of transport infrastructure than slow onset processes and trends. For this reason, managing this type of events should be prioritized and, more specifically, those extreme events affecting road transport infrastructures in Europe. In order to establish the causality effect relationships between climate impact drivers and assets, it is mandatory to clarify the following concepts. Icarus considers 3 target areas according to the 3 levels: asset level, connection level, and network level. Network level comes to be defined by the road strategy. This approach is important because the improvement of the service provided by transport infrastructure and its resilience needs, starting by clearly define the parts of the transport system to be considered. Direct damages. These damages trigger intervention actions by infrastructure manager to recover previous infrastructure asset condition. These interventions are the ones required to ensure that infrastructure once again provides an adequate services. It is important to make the difference between maintenance associated with the cost of intervention if no event occurs and the cost of interventions if an event occurs. Indirect damages are based on measures look at transportation's contribution to the general economy and are expressed in measures such as economic output, employment, and incomes. Various proxy measures are often used to gauge economic development impacts, including traffic at border crossings, manufacturers, shippers, employees who have relocated for transportation purposes, volume of freight originating or terminating in region, number of percent of employees that city, difficulty in accessing the need labor supply because of transportation, and measures of truck travel per unit of regional economic activity. These concepts are applied in the definition of impact chains presented in the next slide, which are based on 4 pillars: hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and impact. On the one hand, target area and road strategy should be clear when vulnerability and exposure is assessed. On the other hand, it is important to distinguish between direct and indirect damages for impact assessment. Impact chain is an analytical concept to better understand, systematize, and prioritize the climate factors as well as environmental and socioeconomic factors that drive climate-related threats, vulnerabilities, and risks in a specific system. Impact chains serve as the backbone for an operational climate vulnerability assessment with indicators based on quantitative approaches combined with expert assessment. Icarus proposes the use of impact chains as a methodology to understand how the various climate hazards can impact the roads, including also the opportunity for adaptive responses. In this regard, it's necessary to be aware that an adaptive response to the impact chains may well have impacts of their own. For instance, responses may drive up the carbon impact of the road. Hazard is the starting point of the impact chain, the first step. Sometimes the hazard is caused by a combination of events on a smaller scale that need to be known to understand how the threat is triggered. The understanding of the confidence of occurrence gives the national authority the importance of its specific hazard in the future. Exposure is the second step to consider for the impact chain development because it will help in the definition of the area to be prioritized according to different aspects as explained before. The exposure concept refers to the presence of people, livelihoods, species or ecosystems, environmental functions, services and resources, economic, social or cultural assets in places and settings that could be adversely affected. Vulnerability is the third step to analyzing the impact chain after hazard and exposure assessment. Once potential hazards are identified and the presence of natural and human systems, services, etc. is confirmed, it is time to specify the level of intrinsicity, extensivity to be analyzed. The propensity or predisposition of the exposed to be adversely affected by hazard and encompasses the combination of sensitivity and adaptive capacity. It depends on the hazard as well as on the intrinsic factors of the infrastructure itself. Impact means the consequences of realized risks on natural and human systems, where risks result from the interactions of climate-related hazards, exposure, and vulnerability. That is why impact is the fourth step to be considered. Impacts generally refer to the effects on lives, livelihoods, health, on well-being, ecosystems and species, economic, social, and cultural assets, services, including the ecosystem services and infrastructure. The impacts will refer to the intrinsic vulnerability at different levels, considering network connection and asset level, but also asset component and subcomponent level. This is an example of impact chain for bridge and pluvial flood. Step 1 of the impact chain is the hazard identification. As I said, this impact chain starts with the identification of the pluvial flood as a climate impact driver to be considered. Step 2 is focused on the exposure. It means the characterization of the transport area to be prioritized according to external conditions. The prioritization can be done in different ways. In this case, the land use, for example, can be as an important condition to be considered. Then we jump to step 3, the vulnerability. It means the definition of asset component, subcomponent, and asset connection network. It means to bear in mind the internal conditions and characteristics. This step defines the level of detail of the impact to be analyzed in step 4. Step 4 is focused on the impact, direct and indirect damages at different levels. The impacts at component and subcomponent level are associated with dotted lines to mark the difference with the impacts and the higher level section and network. In this regard, a cluster of KPIs are proposed. Nature-based solutions opportunities can be detected at this level. In this impact chain, the river course has been included as another element of the bridge because some national authorities consider river course as a point to be considered in bridge inspection. Now, imagine we develop 10 impact chains considering different assets and climate impact drivers. Nevertheless, impact chain considers spatial but not temporal scale, where it is important to consider resilience perspective for a tailored hazard classification for route manager. Then it's necessary to calculate the resilience impact score considering time and factors affecting service. This resilience impact score is calculated based on the impact of the hazard or event on the asset. The higher the score, the greater the impact on the asset, and the greater the loss of service of disruption. This classification technique may be used to identify high-impact climate events which cause disruption to the network. It can also be used to compare impact of different events on assets and help in the decision-making process. If higher scores are achieved, then adaptation options should be considered to increase asset resilience. When mapping the pathways of risk for all road assets in the context of national road authorities, there are several factors to consider: climate projections, integration in the transport network, criticality of the infrastructure, damage categorization, etc. The approach presented here includes a methodology to close the gap between scientific committees' projections and national road authorities' daily consequences of hazards, and quick classification and prioritization of hazards opposed to the generally used classification regarding hazards themselves. This work has been developed to support decision making at the different management levels and national road authorities and the roles and jurisdiction that come with these levels. The strategic level, top-down approach, considering the IPCC climate change projections for different areas around the world are accepted by the scientific committees and European Commission, so the long-term management of transport infrastructures must put the focus on them. Nevertheless, do not lose the balance between long-term and short-term decision-making, classification, and prioritization is needed. The tactical level. Icarus provides a methodology to bridge the gap between high-level projections, expectancy of hazard, intensity, etc., and direct and indirect damages affecting road infrastructures. On the one hand, this methodology makes use of impact chains, including damage for hazard prioritization based on magnitude and geography. On the other one, Icarus provides the resilience score concept to include time into the classification of hazards to the effect on the resilience of roads. And finally, the operational level. On the operational level, it is key to understand what impacts are and how this should be used to retrofit the process, again considering the key performance indicators proposed in Icarus. Thank you for watching our video. I hope it has helped you to understand impact chains a little more and will help you to try to classify hazards from a resilience perspective considering spatial and temporal scale. Please follow the link below or scan the QR code to find more information in relation to this project. Go to the research section of the Icarus website and in particular deliverable 1.2, which is related to the content of this video. Thank you.